The earliest known event in the Five Nights at Freddy's timeline predates the franchise's main story by over 40 years, involving a tragic incident at Fredbear's Family Diner in the 1970s. And what makes that fact so unsettling is that most players never see it happen, never witness the moment that sets everything else in motion, because it's buried beneath layers of minigames, hidden newspaper clippings, and cryptic dialogue scattered across nearly a decade of releases. This is the hidden lore of FNAF, a sprawling, fragmented narrative that Scott Cawthon built not as a straightforward story, but as a puzzle box, one that requires you to piece together scraps of information from secret screens, rare voice lines, and Easter eggs so obscure that entire communities have spent years debating what they mean. It's a timeline that spans 5 decades, multiple locations, and at least 3 generations of the same cursed family, all orbiting around a single horrifying truth that the animatronic characters designed to entertain children became vessels for something far darker, and that the man responsible for it all never stopped experimenting, never stopped killing even after death. The lore isn't just backstory, it's the story, hidden in plain sight across 8 mainline games, countless spin offs, and a labyrinth of meta narrative tricks that blur the line between what's canon and what's misdirection. To understand any of it, we have to go back to the very beginning, to a time before Freddy Fazbear's Pizza existed, before the animatronics had names that would become infamous, before the murders that would trap souls inside metal endoskeletons for decades. We have to start with 2 men, a partnership, and a dream that would curdle into a nightmare. The first man was Henry Emily, a brilliant engineer and inventor who saw animatronics not just as entertainment, but as art, as something that could bring joy to children in a way that static puppets and costumes never could. The second man was William Afton, a businessman and co founder who shared Henry's technical genius, but harbored something else beneath the surface, something that wouldn't reveal itself until it was far too late. Together, they opened Fredbear's Family Diner sometime in the early 1970s, a small establishment in Hurricane, Utah, featuring 2 spring-lock animatronic suits, Fredbear, a golden bear, and Spring Bonnie, a yellow rabbit. The spring-lock suits were hybrid designs, capable of functioning as both animatronics and wearable costumes, a cost-saving innovation that allowed employees to climb inside and perform for guests. It was a clever idea. It was also lethally dangerous. The spring lock mechanism worked by winding back the animatronic endoskeleton components, compressing them with a series of spring-loaded locks so a person could fit inside, but the locks were sensitive, prone to failure if exposed to moisture, sudden movement, or pressure, and when they failed, the endoskeleton would snap back into place with enough force to crush bone and puncture organs. Employees were warned, trained, told to move slowly and stay dry. But accidents happened anyway, and the company kept using the suits because they were profitable, because they were part of the brand. Fredbear's Family Diner was a success, popular enough that Henry and William expanded, rebranding under the name Fazbear Entertainment, and opening the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in the early 1980s, introducing new characters, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, each with their own stage presence and personality. But while Henry focused on the creative side, on building animatronics that felt alive, William's attention drifted elsewhere. He became obsessed with the idea of life itself, with the boundary between living and not, and that obsession led him down a path that Henry never saw coming. William Afton had children: Michael, the oldest, Elizabeth, his daughter, and a younger son whose name we never learn. A boy who loved the animatronics, despite being terrified of them, who begged his father for attention and received only neglect. This is where the hidden lore truly begins, in the Afton household, in the dysfunction that William either ignored or engineered. Michael was a bully, cruel in the way that teenagers can be when they're acting out pain they don't know how to process, and he had friends who encouraged him, who helped him torment his younger brother day after day. The younger brother's fear of the animatronics wasn't irrational, it was a phobia, visceral and paralyzing, and Michael knew it, weaponized it, shoved a foxy mask in his face, and locked him in the parts and service room where the deactivated suits were stored. The boy's birthday was coming up in 1983, and the party was being held at Fredbear's Family Diner, the original location, the one their father co owned. Michael and his friends decided to play one last prank. They picked the boy up, crying and screaming, and carried him toward the stage where Fredbear was performing, the massive golden bear with its articulated jaw and friendly, dead eyes. The boy struggled, begged them to stop, but they didn't stop. They lifted him higher, right up to Fredbear's mouth, and then they shoved his head inside between the upper and lower jaw, just for a second, just to scare him. Fredbear's jaw closed. The animatronic's bite force, designed to move and gesture but never to clamp down with full pressure, malfunctioned or was triggered by the weight, and the spring lock mechanisms inside the suit failed, and the boy's skull was crushed in front of a room full of children and parents. This was the bite of '83, the first of two infamous bite incidents in the timeline, and it didn't just kill a child, it shattered the Afton family and set William on a path he might have already been walking. The boy didn't die immediately. He lingered in a hospital for days, and the game shows us his room, his toys, the Fredbear plushie that seems to speak to him with a distorted voice, telling him, "I will put you back together." A promise that might have been a hallucination or might have been something else, something that suggests William was already experimenting with concepts that shouldn't have been possible. The boy died. William didn't grieve the way a father should. Instead, he became fixated on the idea that death wasn't final, that consciousness could be preserved, transferred, bound to something physical, and he started testing that theory in the worst way imaginable. 2 years later, in 1985, William the entire Five Nights at Freddy's timeline begins not with a murder, not with a haunting, but with two men shaking hands in the early 1970s. That handshake would eventually lead to decades of death, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's start where it actually begins. Henry Emily and William Afton meet sometime around 1972, maybe 1973. The exact year doesn't matter as much as what they represented to each other in that moment. Henry was an engineer with a genuine gift for mechanical design, the kind of person who could sketch a complex joint system on a napkin and have it work perfectly when built. William was a businessman, charismatic in that specific way that makes people overlook the fact that they don't really know anything about him. He had money, or at least access to it. He had ambition, and he had an interest in robotics that Henry mistook for passion. They bonded over the idea of animatronic entertainment. This was the era when Chuck E. Cheese was just getting started, when the concept of mechanical performers in family restaurants felt new and exciting rather than dated and creepy. Henry saw an opportunity to create something genuinely innovative, machines that could move fluidly, interact with audiences, bring joy to children. William saw something else, though he was smart enough not to say what. So they pooled their resources and opened Fredbear's Family Diner in the mid-1970s. The exact location isn't specified in the games, but it was somewhere in Utah, a modest building with a stage, tables, a kitchen, and two animatronic performers, Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, a yellow bear and a yellow rabbit. Well, these weren't your standard automated performers, the kind that just swayed back and forth on a loop. Henry had designed something genuinely special, spring lock suits. That's what made Fredbear's different. The technology was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. The idea was simple enough on paper. Create animatronic suits that could function in two modes. In an animatronic mode, The suits would be filled with mechanical components, gears, pistons, servos, all the machinery needed to make them move and perform autonomously on stage. But when you needed a human performer inside for meet and greets or walking around the dining room, you could activate a hand crank that would compress and lock all those metal parts against the inside walls of the suit. This created just enough space for a person to climb inside and wear the suit like a costume. It was brilliant. It was also phenomenally dangerous, but we'll get to that. The diner became a local success almost immediately. Parents loved it because their kids loved it. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie would perform songs, simple routines choreographed to music that Henry programmed himself. Between shows, employees would crank the spring locks, climb inside the suits, and interact directly with children. The line between machine and person blurred in a way that felt magical to a 5-year-old in 1975. Henry threw himself into the family friendly aspect of it all. He genuinely believed in what they were building. This wasn't just a restaurant to him, it was a place where technology could create wonder, where engineering could serve joy. He'd spend hours fine tuning the animatronics' movements, making sure Fredbear's wave looked natural, ensuring Spring Bonnie's head tilt felt friendly rather than mechanical. Every detail mattered to him because every detail contributed to a child's experience. William Afton, meanwhile, became fascinated with the technology for different reasons. He started spending more and more time with the animatronics after hours, studying their programming, testing their capabilities. On the surface, this looked like dedication, like a business partner invested in understanding the product. Henry probably appreciated it at first, but William wasn't interested in making the performances better. He was interested in what else the machines could do. He began experimenting with their programming in ways that had nothing to do with entertainment. He'd alter their movement patterns, testing how they responded to proximity sensors, how their behavioral loops could be modified. He was particularly interested in their interactions with children, specifically in contexts outside the standard performances. This is where the first cracks start to show. Employees at Fredbear's began reporting glitches, small things at first. Fredbear would turn his head to follow a child walking by, even when he was supposed to be in rest mode. Spring Bonnie's eyes would track movement in ways that weren't part of the programmed routines. The animatronics would sometimes move when they were alone with children in ways they didn't move during regular shows. Subtle things, unnerving things, but nothing that caused injuries, nothing that Henry could point to as a concrete problem that needed fixing. William would always have an explanation: sensor calibration issues, residual motion from the pneumatic systems, feedback loops in the programming. He'd say he was working on it, and Henry, trusting his partner, believed him, but William wasn't fixing anything. He was refining it. He had become obsessed with something specific, something he'd noticed during those after-hours experiments: children's fear responses, the way a child's body language changed when an animatronic moved unexpectedly, the way their breathing shifted, the particular quality of attention they gave to something that seemed alive but wasn't, something that occupied the uncanny valley between machine and creature. William started deliberately programming behaviors designed to elicit these responses, studying them, documenting them. This wasn't scientific curiosity. This was something darker taking shape. He was planting seeds for experiments that wouldn't fully bloom for years, but the foundation was being laid in those early days at Fredbear's. William Afton was learning that fear, particularly children's fear, had a quality he found useful. He didn't understand why yet, didn't have the full framework of his later theories about emotional energy and remnant and soul mechanics. But he was noticing patterns. He was taking notes. While all this was happening, both men's families became intertwined with the business. Henry's daughter, Charlotte Emily, was born in the mid 1970s. She became a fixture at the diner, practically growing up on the premises. Henry would bring her in during off hours, let her watch him work on the animatronics. She loved Fredbear and Spring Bonnie with the uncomplicated affection of a child who doesn't see the machinery, only the magic. The diner wasn't just her father's workplace, it was her second home. She'd draw pictures of the characters, insist on being there for every birthday party, wave at the animatronics like they were friends. William Afton's son, Michael, was born around the same time, but William's relationship with his son was nothing like Henry's relationship with Charlotte. William showed almost no paternal warmth, no interest in Michael as a person. When he looked at his son, he seemed to see something clinical, something useful. Even in those early years, the people who knew the family noticed how cold William was with the boy, how he'd observe Michael's reactions to things rather than participate in them, how he treated his own child more like a test subject than a son. This coldness, this fundamental lack of empathy, was already present. It would define everything that came after. Then came the first A Missing Child. It happened at Fredbear's family diner, sometime in the late 1970s. A child who'd been at the restaurant simply vanished. One moment they were there, documented by parents and staff as being present. Then they weren't. No one saw them leave. No witnesses reported anything suspicious. The police investigated, of course. They interviewed employees, searched the building, followed every lead they had. They found nothing. The case went cold within weeks. There wasn't enough evidence to pursue any particular suspect. No body, no clear indication of foul play beyond the absence itself. The official conclusion was that the child had somehow left the premises unnoticed, that whatever happened occurred somewhere else. The restaurant wasn't considered a crime scene. Fredbear's family diner remained open. But something had happened there. Someone had taken that child, and that someone had gotten away with it. William Afton had learned something valuable. He'd learned that it was possible. He began spending even more time in the back areas of the restaurant, in the parts room where spare animatronic components were stored. He'd dismantle parts, study their construction, reassemble them in different configurations. On the surface, this looked like maintenance work, like a co-owner taking hands-on responsibility for the equipment. But William wasn't maintaining anything. He was studying the mechanics with a specific question in mind. What else could these machines hold? He was looking at the empty shells of animatronic endoskeletons, at the spaces inside the suits, at the way the spring lock mechanisms created cavities and compartments. He was thinking about volume, about what could fit inside these characters, about functions that had nothing to do with entertainment. Henry, focused on improving the performances and expanding the business, didn't notice. Or maybe he noticed, but didn't understand what he was seeing. It's hard to recognize evil when it's standing next to you wearing a business partner's face, speaking your language, sharing your dream. But the dream was already compromised. William Afton had already killed, had already proven to himself that he could do it without consequence. And he was surrounded by machines that could move, that could lure, that could contain. Everything that would follow, all the death and horror and tragedy that would span decades, was already in motion. The foundation had been laid in those first few years at Fredbear's family diner, in William's late-night experiments, in that first disappeared child, in the spring lock suits that could be so many things depending on who was using them and why. The 1970s were coming to an end. The business was successful, and William Afton was just getting started. Henry Emily was no fool. He'd built animatronics from scratch, run a business, raised a family. And somewhere in the mid-1970s, he started noticing things. Small things at first. William would disappear during operating hours, sometimes for 20 or 30 minutes at a time, always with a vague excuse about checking the back room or running an errand. He'd return with grease on his hands that didn't match the kind of work they did on the suits. Henry would find tools moved in the workshop, components missing from inventory, that William claimed he'd used for repairs, but the repairs were never logged. There were conversations William would cut short the moment Henry entered the room, phone calls he'd take outside. Henry's gut told him something was off. His partner, his friend, the man he'd built this dream with, was hiding something. But what could he do? Confront William with what, exactly? A feeling? Missing screws? An odd behavior? Henry had no evidence, thus nothing concrete, just a growing unease that sat in his chest like a stone. So he watched, he waited, and the rift between them, invisible to everyone else, started to grow. William, meanwhile, had stumbled onto something extraordinary. It happened almost by accident. One of the older animatronics, a prototype they'd built before Fredbear, had malfunctioned beyond repair. The servos had burned out, the wiring was shot, and William decided to dismantle it completely, salvage what he could. He was alone in the workshop late one night, pulling apart the endoskeleton piece by piece, when he noticed something strange. The metal, particularly around the joints in the core frame, had an odd quality to it. It wasn't just wear and tear. There was a faint discoloration, almost like a stain, but it wasn't rust or oil. He held a piece under the light, turned it over in his hands, and then, on a whim, he brought it near one of the active animatronics. The metal seemed to respond, not visibly, not in any way he could measure with the tools he had, but he felt it. A pull, a resonance. He ran tests over the following weeks, careful to do it when Henry wasn't around. He subjected the metal to heat, cold electrical currents. He documented the way it seemed to hold a charge longer than it should, the way it affected the behavior of nearby electronics. He didn't have a name for it yet, but he knew he'd found something, something that shouldn't exist according to any engineering manual he'd ever read. He started calling it remnant in his notes, a placeholder term that stuck, and the more he studied it, the more obsessed he became. Then came the incident that should have shut everything down. It was a Saturday afternoon, peak hours, families everywhere. One of the employees, a young man named Curtis, who'd been with them since the diner opened, was helping a kid try on the spring Bonnie suit for a photo op. This was something they did occasionally, let an employee wear the suit and walk around, interact with the children. The spring lock mechanism, the system that held the animatronic components back when a person was inside, was delicate. It required perfect conditions, no moisture, no sudden movements, careful calibration. Curtis sneezed. That's all it took. The moisture from his breath, the slight jerk of his body, and the spring locks released. Not all of them, but enough. The metal components snapped forward into the suit, into him, piercing his arm and shoulder. He screamed. Parents grabbed their children. Blood seeped through the fabric of the costume. Henry and William rushed him to the back room, got him out of the suit, called for help. Curtis survived, barely. He'd need surgery, months of recovery. He signed a non-disclosure agreement 2 days later in a hospital bed, a check for more money than he'd make in 5 years, sitting on the table beside him. The story, publicly, was that he'd had an accident in the kitchen. A slip, a fall, nothing to do with the suits. Henry wanted to destroy the Springlock costumes entirely after that. William talked him down. They were safe, he insisted, as long as protocols were followed. Curtis had been careless. It wouldn't happen again. They'd retrain everyone, implement new safety measures. Henry, exhausted and desperate to keep the business afloat, agreed, but he made William promise no more Springlock suits for employees, only for controlled environments. William promised. He was lying, because by this point, William had started keeping journals, not the official maintenance logs or business records, private notebooks filled with his remnant experiments, his observations, his theories. He wrote in a code of his own design, a mix of symbols and shorthand that would look like gibberish to anyone else. He documented the properties of remnant, the way it seemed to linger in metal, that had been in close proximity to life, to emotion, to trauma. He theorized about its potential applications. Could it be transferred? Could it be concentrated? Could it be used to preserve something, to keep something alive beyond its natural span? He hid the journals in his workshop at home, in a locked drawer Henry would never see. He told himself he was being cautious, that Henry wouldn't understand, that this was research that needed to be protected. But the truth was simpler. He knew Henry would try to stop him. Fredbear's family diner held one last birthday party before the end. It was in late 1979, a cold afternoon in November. The family had booked the whole place, a big celebration for their daughter's 8th birthday. 40 kids, maybe more. The diner was packed, loud, chaotic. William watched from the sidelines, not as a host, but as an observer. He'd set up a small test without telling Henry. He'd adjusted the animatronics' movement patterns, made them slightly more erratic, slightly more unpredictable. Nothing dangerous, nothing that would cause harm, but enough to see how the children reacted. Did they pull away? Did they laugh? Did they cry? He took notes on a small pad he kept in his pocket. He watched which kids were drawn to the characters and which ones shrank back. He noted the ones who seemed fascinated, even when they were scared. He was studying them, cataloging them, and when the party ended and the families left, he felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with the business. This was data. This was useful. The diner closed its doors for the last time in December of 1979. Officially, the reason given to the public was renovations, a temporary closure, they said, to update the facilities and improve the experience. But anyone paying attention knew the truth. The missing child case, still unsolved, had left a stain on the diner's reputation that no amount of marketing could scrub away. Parents whispered. Attendance had dropped. The finances were a mess. Henry tried to keep it together, tried to find a way forward, but the diner as it was couldn't survive. So they closed. They locked the doors. They turned off the lights. And William, ever practical, salvaged what he could. He took the Fredbear and Spring Bonnie animatronics, loaded them into a truck one night, and brought them to a private workshop he'd rented on the edge of town. Henry thought they were going into storage, that they'd be refurbished for the next location. William had other plans. He wanted them close. He wanted to study them, to take them apart, to see if the remnant he'd found in the old prototype was present in these suits too, especially Spring Bonnie, especially the suit he'd worn. But William and Henry weren't done, not by a long shot. Closing the diner didn't mean giving up. It meant evolving. In early 1980, they filed the paperwork to form Fazbear Entertainment as a corporate entity. It was Henry's idea, a way to separate the new venture from the baggage of the old one, a fresh start, a new brand. They'd take what worked, the animatronics, the pizza, the family-friendly atmosphere, and scale it up, make it bigger, better, more profitable. They started scouting locations for the first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a full-scale restaurant that would dwarf the little diner they'd started with. Henry threw himself into the design work, sketching new characters, new stages, new layouts. He wanted this to be perfect. He wanted to prove that the dream wasn't dead. William, for his part, played the supportive partner. He attended meetings, reviewed contracts, nodded along with Henry's plans. But his mind was elsewhere, because while Henry designed stages and dining areas, William was designing something else entirely. He called them the Fun Time Animatronics. The blueprints were intricate, far more advanced than anything they'd built before. These weren't just performers. They had features Henry would never approve of. Hidden compartments, reinforced endoskeletons, systems designed to do more than entertain. William incorporated everything he'd learned from his remnant research. He theorized that if remnant could be harvested, it could also be stored, transferred, used. The Fun Time animatronics would be vessels. He didn't write that part down, not explicitly, but the designs spoke for themselves. Storage tanks built into the torso, scooping mechanisms, reinforced frames that could withstand internal pressure. He told himself he was just exploring possibilities, just seeing what could be done. But he knew he'd already decided what they were for. By mid 1980, the pieces were in place. The first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was set to open within the year. Henry had poured his heart into it, every detail, every animatronic, every corner of the building. He believed this was their second chance. He believed they could leave the past behind. William let him believe it. He smiled, shook hands, signed documents, and in his private workshop, surrounded by the remnants of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, he continued his experiments. Henry had no idea what his partner was really planning. No idea that the new location, the fresh start, the dream they were building together was going to be the stage for something far darker. The diner had been a beginning. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza would be where William Afton truly started his work. We left off with two ambitious engineers building something that would change everything. But success has a way of revealing who people really are. And in 1983, the cracks in Fredbear's family diner and in William Afton himself were about to split wide open. Fredbear's family diner was still operating at this point. On paper, it looked like the dream was intact. William Afton and Henry Emily co-owned the place, and on good days, families packed the dining room to watch Fredbear and Spring Bonnie perform. Kids loved the animatronics. Parents appreciated the affordable entertainment. The two spring-lock suits, those hybrid machines that could function as both autonomous performers and wearable costumes, were the main attraction. Employees could climb inside them during the day to interact with children up close, then switch them to animatronic mode for the stage shows. It was innovative. It was profitable for a while. But William Afton wasn't content with profit. While Henry focused on engineering improvements and customer satisfaction, William's attention drifted somewhere darker. He became obsessed with the idea of immortality, not in a philosophical sense, but in a mechanical one. He started running private experiments with the animatronic technology, trying to understand if something beyond mere programming could be embedded in the machines. He wanted control, not just over the robots, but over life and death itself. This wasn't the mindset of a family restaurant owner. This was something else entirely. Henry didn't see it yet. He was too focused on keeping the business afloat because Fredbear's family diner was starting to struggle. Competition from other entertainment venues was cutting into their revenue. Arcade chains were popping up. Roller rinks were the new trend. The novelty of two animatronic characters performing the same songs every night was wearing thin, and families were spending their money elsewhere. The diner's financial reports showed a steady decline. Foot traffic dropped. Birthday party bookings slowed. Henry ran the numbers and realized they had maybe a year before they'd have to shut down. So William and Henry made a decision. They wouldn't let Fredbear's die. Instead, they'd rebrand. They'd go bigger. In late 1983, they began planning the transformation of Fredbear's family diner into something new, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The concept was simple. More animatronics meant more spectacle. More spectacle meant more customers. They designed 4 new characters to join the lineup. Freddy Fazbear, a brown bear with a top hat and microphone, would be the frontman. Bonnie, a blue rabbit with a guitar. Chica, a yellow chicken with a cupcake. And Foxy, a red pirate fox with a hook hand, designed to appeal to the kids who wanted something edgier. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie would stay in rotation, at least for a while, but the focus would shift to this new cast. It was a gamble, but it was the only move they had. While the business was transforming, William Afton's home life was falling apart. The Afton family consisted of William, his wife, whose name is never confirmed in the games, but whose presence or lack of it looms over everything and their three children. Michael, the oldest, was a teenager with a cruel streak. Evan, the youngest son, was fragile and fearful, and Elizabeth, the daughter, was somewhere in the middle, curious and desperate for her father's attention. William's wife barely appears in the timeline, and there's a reason for that. Whether she left, whether she died, or whether William's obsession simply erased her from the narrative, the family was functionally without a mother. William was absent in every way that mattered. He spent his time at the diner or locked in his private workshop, and his children were left to fend for themselves. Evan Afton bore the worst of it. He was young, probably around 7 or 8, and he was terrified of the animatronics. Not the way most kids are startled by a loud noise or a sudden movement. This was deeper. Evan had nightmares, vivid, recurring nightmares, where twisted versions of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy hunted him through dark hallways. He'd wake up screaming. In the FNAF 4 gameplay, we experienced these nightmares firsthand, but they weren't just random fears. Evan had seen things at the diner. He'd watched the animatronics glitch mid-performance, their heads snapping in unnatural directions. He'd heard the spring-lock suits hiss and creak when employees wore them, and he'd witnessed something that would scar him permanently. At some point before his birthday, Evan saw a spring-lock failure. The details are implied rather than explicit, but the evidence is there. A spring-lock suit, likely Fredbear or Spring Bonnie, malfunctioned while an employee was inside. Spring-lock mechanisms were designed with dozens of pressurized springs that held the animatronic components back when a person wore the suit. If moisture, sudden movement, or mechanical wear caused even one spring to snap loose, it triggered a chain reaction. All the metal beams, gears, and endoskeleton parts would slam inward in less than a second, crushing and impaling whoever was inside. It was an agonizing way to die. Evan saw the aftermath, or maybe he saw it happen. Either way, he knew what those suits could do, and Fredbear, the mascot his father helped create, became the focus of his terror. Michael Afton didn't help. Michael was a teenager dealing with his own issues, a father who ignored him, and a family that was disintegrating, but instead of processing that, he took it out on Evan. He bullied his younger brother relentlessly. He'd sneak into Evan's room wearing a foxy mask, jump out from behind doors, chase him through the house. Michael had a group of friends who wore masks too, Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica, and together they made Evan's life hell. It wasn't just teasing, it was psychological torture. They knew Evan was afraid of the animatronics, and they used that fear as a weapon. William Afton was aware of Evan's fear. He had to be, but he didn't stop Michael, and he didn't comfort Evan. If anything, William seemed annoyed by his son's weakness. He was too consumed by his experiments, too fixated on his theories about remnant, a term that wouldn't be named until later, but describes the concept William was chasing. The idea that human emotion, especially the kind produced by terror and death, could be harvested and embedded into machinery to give it something like life. Evan's fear wasn't a problem to solve. It was data. The spring-lock suits were central to William's work. He designed the mechanism himself, and Fredbear was his proudest creation. The suit could be worn by an employee during the day, entertaining children with handshakes and hugs, then locked into animatronic mode at night for automated performances. The engineering was brilliant, but it was also deadly. William knew the risks. He'd written the training protocols himself. Employees were instructed to avoid moisture, to move slowly, to check every spring before putting the suit on. But accidents still happened. The spring lock failure Evan witnessed wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. William didn't retire the suits. He kept using them because they were too valuable to his research, and because he didn't care about the cost. Evan's birthday was coming up. He didn't want a party. He especially didn't want a party at Fredbear's family diner. But William insisted, or maybe Michael pushed for it, or maybe it was just expected. Either way, Evan found himself at the diner on his birthday in 1983, surrounded by the machines that haunted his nightmares. The main dining area was full of families. Fredbear and Spring Bonnie were on stage, performing their usual routine. Evan stayed as far from the stage as possible, clinging to the walls trying to disappear. Michael and his friends saw an opportunity. They were wearing their masks, Freddie, Bonnie, Chica, and Michael in the Foxy mask. They cornered Evan near the stage. Evan begged them to stop. He was crying. He tried to run, but Michael grabbed him. The other kids helped. They lifted Evan off the ground, carrying him toward the stage while he screamed and thrashed. The other families in the diner watched, some laughing, thinking it was part of the show. Evan's father was somewhere else, not watching, not intervening. They lifted Evan up to Fredbear's face. The animatronic was in the middle of a performance, its jaw opening and closing in time with the pre-recorded music. Michael and his friends thought it would be funny to put Evan's head in Fredbear's mouth just for a second, just to scare him one more time. So they did. They shoved Evan's head between Fredbear's jaws, right as the animatronic's mouth was closing for the next line of the song. Something went wrong. Maybe it was the added weight. Maybe it was the moisture from Evan's tears. Maybe the spring locks were already worn down from years of use. Whatever the reason, Fredbear malfunctioned. The jaw didn't stop. It clamped down with the full force of the hydraulic system, metal teeth piercing through Evan's skull. The sound was immediate and horrible. The music cut out. Parents screamed. Kids started crying. Michael dropped his brother and stumbled backward, pulling off his mask, staring at what he'd just done. Evan collapsed when they pulled him free. Blood pooled on the stage. Paramedics were called. The diner was evacuated, and Evan Afton, the boy who was afraid of Fredbear, was rushed to the hospital with his head crushed by the very thing he feared most. This was the bite of 83, the incident that would haunt Michael for the rest of his life and set in motion everything that came after. Evan is rushed to the hospital, but the damage is catastrophic. The bite has crushed his frontal lobe. The doctors do everything they can, but there's no coming back from an injury like that. For days, Evan lingers in a coma, his father at his bedside, his brother somewhere in the background, paralyzed by what he's done. And then quietly, Evan dies. It's the first major tragedy at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and it won't be the last. Michael is destroyed. He's just a teenager, and he's killed his little brother. Not on purpose, sure, but intent doesn't bring anyone back. The guilt is immediate and suffocating. He replays the moment, over and over, the way Evan screamed, the way the animatronic's jaw came down, the way everything went wrong in an instant. Michael doesn't know how to process it. He withdraws. He stops talking to his friends. He can't look his father in the eye. This is the moment that defines him, the wound that will never fully heal. Years later, Michael will spend his entire life trying to atone for what he did, trying to undo the damage, trying to fix a family that's already shattered beyond repair. But in 1983, he's just a kid who made a terrible mistake, and he has no idea how to live with it. William Afton, meanwhile, is devastated in a different way. He's lost his son, his youngest boy, the one he maybe didn't pay enough attention to, the one who was scared of everything, is gone. And William doesn't grieve like a normal person. He doesn't cry, doesn't reach out, doesn't try to hold what's left of his family together. Instead, he turns inward. He becomes obsessed. Because William Afton is a man who solves problems, who builds things, who controls outcomes. And death is the one problem he can't solve, yet. The incident leads to the temporary closure of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The company has to investigate. There's a child dead, a malfunctioning animatronic, liability concerns, potential lawsuits. Fazbear Entertainment scrambles to contain the damage, to figure out what went wrong, to repair its reputation before the whole thing collapses. They rebrand, they pivot, they promise new safety measures, and eventually they reopen, because that's what corporations do. But the closure gives William time to think, time to experiment, time to spiral. This is when William starts experimenting with something he'll later call remnant. It's a substance, or maybe a property, tied to the animatronics themselves. Specifically, it's connected to the endoskeletons, the metal frames that give the mascots their structure. But it's more than just metal. Remnant is, in William's theory, the key to immortality. It's a way to preserve life, to anchor a soul to the physical world, to cheat death entirely. Where he gets this idea isn't entirely clear. Maybe it's something he stumbled on during his years of engineering work. Maybe it's desperation dressed up as science. But William becomes convinced that if he can isolate Remnant, if he can understand how it works, he can bring people back, or at least keep them from leaving in the first place. He works in secret. His experiments are crude at first, exploratory, hidden in the back rooms of his workshop. He's trying to understand the relationship between life and machinery, between flesh and metal, between the living and the dead. It's obsessive, it's unhinged, and it's the beginning of everything that comes after. The Afton family, what's left of it, starts to fall apart. William becomes distant. He's barely home. When he is, he's locked in his office or down in the basement, surrounded by blueprints and spare parts and tools. He doesn't talk to Michael. He doesn't comfort his daughter, Elizabeth. He doesn't acknowledge his wife, if she's even still in the picture at this point. The family is fracturing, and William either doesn't notice or doesn't care. His mind is somewhere else entirely. And that obsession, that need to control life and death through animatronic technology, leads him to his next project. Circus Baby's Pizza World. It's a new restaurant concept, separate from Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, something William is developing on his own or in partnership with Fazbear Entertainment, depending on how you read the timeline. Either way, it's his baby. Circus Baby's Pizza World is supposed to be the next evolution of animatronic entertainment. The robots here aren't just costumes with simple programming. They're advanced, they're sleek, they're designed to interact with children in ways the old models never could. And the star of the show is Circus Baby herself. Circus Baby is William's masterpiece, at least on the surface. She's designed to look friendly, colorful, appealing to kids. She's got a voice modulator, articulated limbs, expressive features. She can sing, she can dance, she can hand out ice cream and balloons. She's everything a child would want in a robot entertainer. But there's something else built into her, something William doesn't advertise. Circus Baby has a secondary function, a hidden mechanism in her chest cavity. It's designed to grab, to pull inward, to store. Why William builds this into her is a question that haunts the lore. Some think it's part of his remnant experiments, that he's designing animatronics capable of capturing and containing something he needs for his research. Others think it's darker than that William is already planning something terrible, already laying the groundwork for what will eventually become the missing children incident. Either way, Circus Baby is dangerous, and William knows it. He warns his daughter, Elizabeth, to stay away from her. Elizabeth is William's youngest child, his only daughter, and she's fascinated by Circus Baby. She thinks the animatronic is beautiful. She wants to see her up close, wants to interact with her, wants to be special in her father's eyes by engaging with his work. But William is firm. He tells her not to go near Circus Baby. He tells her it's not safe. He tells her to wait. Elizabeth doesn't listen. It happens during a private event, or maybe during a test run before the restaurant's official opening. The timeline here is a little murky, but the outcome is clear. Elizabeth approaches Circus Baby when no one else is around. She's alone with the animatronic, drawn in by the promise of ice cream or a balloon or just the chance to be close to something her father built. And Circus Baby's programming activates. The claw in her chest extends. It grabs Elizabeth, it pulls her inside. Elizabeth Afton is killed by Circus Baby, instantly, violently. And just like that, William loses another child. This is the second domino. If Evan's death cracked something in William, Elizabeth's death shatters it completely. He's now lost two of his three children, both to animatronics, both to machines he either built or helped design. The irony is suffocating. The guilt, if William even feels guilt anymore, is buried under layers of obsession and rage and grief that's curdled into something unrecognizable. He doesn't stop experimenting. He doesn't shut down Circus Baby's pizza world out of love or respect for his daughter. He shuts it down because it's a liability, because it's a failure, because it didn't do what he needed it to do. But here's the thing. Elizabeth doesn't just die. Her soul, her consciousness, whatever you want to call it, becomes trapped inside Circus Baby. This is the first confirmed instance of a child's spirit possessing an animatronic, and it sets the template for everything that follows. Elizabeth is still in there, somewhere, aware but confused, her identity tangled up with the machine that killed her. She'll stay that way for decades. William's grief deepens, but it doesn't soften him. It does the opposite. It drives him further into darkness. He becomes more reckless, more willing to cross lines, more convinced that his experiments with Remnant are the answer. He's no longer just trying to understand death. He's trying to conquer it. And if that means using other people's children, if that means building machines that kill, if that means becoming something monstrous, then so be it. Michael, meanwhile, is still reeling from Evan's death. He doesn't know about Elizabeth yet, or if he does, he's too broken to process it. The Afton family is barely a family anymore. It's just three people, maybe two, orbiting each other in silence, each one trapped in their own private hell. The bite of 83 and Elizabeth's death are the twin pillars of William Afton's transformation. They're the events that turn him from a brilliant but morally ambiguous engineer into the man who will eventually be known as the Purple Guy. They're the reason he starts hunting, the reason he starts killing, the reason the missing children incident, the central horror of the entire franchise, becomes inevitable. Because William Afton doesn't just want to understand Remnant anymore. He wants to harvest it, and to do that he needs test subjects, he needs children, he needs tragedy. And Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, with its dark corners and its animatronic mascots and its endless supply of unsupervised kids, is the perfect hunting ground. 2 years after the bite of 83 tore the Afton family apart, William Afton is still standing, still working, still building. But something inside him has changed. The loss of his youngest son didn't break him the way it should have. Instead, it bent him in a different direction entirely, toward an obsession that would define everything that followed. Because by 1985, William Afton has moved past grief and landed somewhere far darker. He's begun experimenting with something he calls Remnant, a substance he believes can capture and preserve human consciousness, human life, beyond death. And he's willing to do anything to understand it. Remnant, as Afton theorizes it, is the physical manifestation of a soul's energy. It's what remains when a person dies in extreme emotional distress, when their final moments are so traumatic that their essence refuses to let go. It clings to objects, to metal, to anything nearby. Afton has seen hints of this before. He's watched his own son's spirit linger, trapped in ways that shouldn't be possible, and now he wants to replicate it, control it, harvest it. This isn't about bringing anyone back, not really. It's about proving that death can be conquered, that consciousness can be preserved, that he can become something more than human. immortality, in other words. And William Afton has decided that the best way to study Remnant is to create it himself. At the same time, Fazbear Entertainment is moving forward. The original Fredbear's Family Diner still operates, but the company has expanded. In 1985, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza opens its doors as a full scale family restaurant, bigger and brighter than anything that came before. This is the flagship location, the one that's supposed to prove the brand can scale. It features four main animatronic entertainers, each one a refined evolution of the earlier designs. There's Freddy Fazbear himself, the brown bear with the top hat and microphone, the face of the franchise. Bonnie the Bunny, a purple guitar player with a laid back charm. Chica the chicken, a yellow bird with a bib that reads, "Let's eat." And a cupcake companion named fittingly Mr. Cupcake. And Foxy the pirate, a red fox with an eye patch and a hook, stationed in his own dedicated area called Pirate Cove. The place is designed to be a wonderland for kids. Arcade games, pizza, animatronic performances every hour. Families pack the building on weekends. It's a success, at least on the surface. But William Afton isn't there to entertain children. He's there to study them. More specifically, he's there to study what happens when they die. Afton has already begun laying the groundwork. He's designed a new kind of animatronic suit, one that serves a dual purpose. It's called Spring Bonnie, a yellow rabbit character that matches the original Fredbear design in style, but stands apart as its own entity. Spring Bonnie is what's known as a spring lock suit. That means it's fitted with a series of intricate spring loaded mechanisms that can be wound back to create space inside the costume, allowing a human to wear it like a mascot suit. When the spring locks are set, the animatronic parts compress against the inner walls and a person can climb inside, walk around, perform for guests. It's a clever piece of engineering, and it gives Afton exactly what he needs: plausible deniability, access, a disguise that lets him move through the pizzeria as a character, not a person. Kids trust Spring Bonnie. They see the bright yellow fur, the friendly smile, the oversized cartoon proportions, and they don't see danger. They see fun. Afton knows this. He's counting on it. The first victim is a boy named Gabriel. He's young, maybe 8 or 9, and he's at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza on a day like any other. The restaurant is busy, loud, full of the kind of controlled chaos that makes it easy for a child to wander off, unnoticed. Gabriel is drawn to the animatronics, fascinated by them the way most kids are, and then he sees Spring Bonnie, not on stage, not performing, but standing near a hallway, waving, gesturing for him to follow. Gabriel doesn't hesitate. He doesn't tell his parents. He just follows the rabbit down a corridor, away from the noise and the crowds, into a back room that's off limits to guests. And that's where William Afton kills him. The details of how it happens aren't entirely clear, and maybe that's for the best. What matters is that Gabriel dies quickly, quietly, and his body is hidden almost immediately. Afton doesn't panic. He's planned this. He drags the boy's body to one of the animatronics, Freddy Fazbear himself, and stuffs it inside the suit. The animatronic is large enough to conceal a child's body if you know how to position it, and Afton does. The suit closes, the body is hidden, and Gabriel's soul, still clinging to the moment of his death, doesn't leave. It stays, trapped inside the metal shell, bound to the animatronic by the very trauma that killed him. Afton watches. He waits, and he sees something remarkable. The animatronic begins to move differently, not on its programmed routines, but with something else, something aware. Gabriel's soul has fused with Freddy, animating the machine with a kind of energy that shouldn't exist. This is Remnant. This is what Afton has been searching for, and now that he knows it works, he's going to do it again. The second victim is Jeremy. The third is Susie, then Fritz, then Cassidy. Each one follows the same pattern. Afton waits for the right moment, when the pizzeria is crowded enough that no one notices a missing child right away. He puts on the spring Bonnie suit, approaches a kid who's wandered too far from their parents, and lures them with the promise of something special: a secret room, a hidden prize, a chance to meet the animatronics up close. The children trust him because he looks like part of the show, and once they're alone, Afton kills them, one by one, over the course of weeks, maybe months. He hides their bodies inside the animatronics, the same way he did with Gabriel. Jeremy's body goes into Bonnie, Susie ends up in Chica, Fritz is placed inside Foxy, and Cassidy, the fifth and final victim, is hidden inside a rarely used animatronic known as Golden Freddy, a yellow variant of the Freddy character that sits in the back mostly out of service. Each child's soul becomes trapped. Each one fuses with the machine that holds their body, and each animatronic begins to exhibit behaviors that the technicians can't explain. They move when they shouldn't. They stare at adults with something that looks like recognition, like anger. The programming doesn't account for it. But Afton knows exactly what's happening. He's succeeded. He's created Remnant, harvested it, bound it to metal. 5 children's souls, trapped forever in machines designed to entertain. But he can't keep it hidden for long. Within days, reports start circulating. Parents notice their children are missing. The disappearances all trace back to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, all within the same narrow window of time. Panic spreads. The restaurant tries to control the narrative, insisting the children simply wandered off, that there's no evidence of foul play on the premises. But the parents aren't buying it. And then the smell starts, a foul, rotting odor seeping from the animatronics themselves. Staff members complain about it. Guests notice it. It's the smell of decay, of flesh decomposing inside metal shells that were never meant to hold organic matter. The bodies are breaking down, hidden but not gone. The animatronics are literally rotting from the inside. The police get involved, they have to. 5 missing children, all last seen at the same location, all within a span of weeks. It's not a coincidence. Detectives interview staff, review security footage, search the building top to bottom. They inspect the animatronics, but they don't think to open them. Why would they? They're looking for a person, a suspect, not a hiding place. And William Afton, co-founder of the company, cooperates fully. He answers questions. He expresses concern. He plays the role of a worried business owner whose reputation is being destroyed by a tragedy he had no part in. There's no physical evidence tying him to the murders. No witnesses who saw him without the spring Bonnie suit. No murder weapon. No clear motive that the police can identify. The case stalls. The investigation drags on, but it goes nowhere. Afton walks free. The bodies stay hidden. And the animatronics, now possessed by the vengeful souls of 5 murdered children, remain on stage, performing for crowds who have no idea what's trapped inside them. The missing children incident didn't just leave scars on the families of the victims. It left a stain on Freddy Fazbear's Pizza itself. By 1985, whispers turned to shouts. Parents were suspicious. The community was on edge. Business plummeted. And it wasn't just the rumors. Parents started noticing strange things about the animatronics. Their eyes would follow you. Their movements seemed off, like they weren't just machines anymore. Naturally, the restaurant couldn't survive the backlash. It closed its doors, at least temporarily. But for William Afton, this wasn't a setback. It was an opportunity. Afton wasn't done. Far from it. While Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was shuttered, he was already working on his next project, Circus Baby's Pizza World. This wasn't just another pizzeria. It was something darker, more ambitious. Afton designed a new line of animatronics called the Funtime Animatronics. These weren't like the old ones. They were sleek, advanced, and packed with features no one could have predicted. Features like facial recognition, voice mimicry, and, most chillingly, child capturing mechanisms. Yes, you heard that right. These animatronics were built to lure and trap children. Afton had a plan, and it wasn't just about entertainment. So, why would Afton design something so horrifying? Simple. He was obsessed with Remnant. Remnant is a mysterious substance tied to the soul, and Afton believed it could grant immortality. He'd already experimented with it after the missing children incident, using the souls of the victims to create it. But he wanted more. The Funtime animatronics were his tools for harvesting it. They were programmed to lure children, capture them, and bring them to Afton for his experiments. It was cold, calculated, and utterly monstrous. Circus Baby's Pizza World was announced with fanfare. Posters went up, ads ran on TV. It was supposed to be the next big thing, but it never officially opened. Why? Because of an incident. Afton's daughter, Elizabeth, was drawn to one of the animatronics, Circus Baby. Despite warnings, she approached it, and Circus Baby, true to its programming, captured her. Elizabeth's death was a tragedy, but it was also a turning point. Afton's plans were unraveling. Circus Baby's Pizza World was scrapped, and the Funtime animatronics were moved to a secret underground facility known as the Sister Location. Meanwhile, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza reopened. The original animatronics were still there, still possessed by the souls of the missing children. And they weren't just haunted, they were angry. They began exhibiting erratic behavior, attacking adults they perceived as threats. Night guards reported strange sounds, movement in the shadows, and animatronics that seemed to come alive at night. The restaurant tried to downplay it, but the truth was undeniable. The spirits of the children were trapped, and they were lashing out. Afton, of course, was still lurking in the background. He continued his experiments with Remnant, using the Funtime animatronics to collect more souls. He was relentless, driven by his twisted vision of immortality, but his actions had consequences. The missing children incident wasn't just a tragedy, it was the foundation of Fazbear Entertainment's dark history. It set off a chain of events that would haunt the company for decades, and it all started with 5 children, a yellow rabbit suit, and a man who refused to stop. Let's break this down further. The reopening of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza wasn't just a business decision, it was a desperate attempt to salvage the brand. The owners knew the animatronics were acting strangely, but they couldn't afford to replace them. So they tried to pass it off as mechanical glitches. They issued statements, reassured parents, and even added new security measures. But it didn't work. The animatronics' behavior only got worse. Take Freddy Fazbear himself. He was the face of the franchise, but he wasn't the same. His eyes would glow in the dark. He'd move when no one was watching, and if he saw someone he didn't trust, like a night guard, he'd attack. Bonnie and Chica were no better. They'd wander the halls, their movements jerky and unnatural. And then there was Foxy. He was always the wild card. After the missing children incident, he became even more unpredictable. He'd sprint down the halls, his hook raised, ready to strike. The night guards bore the brunt of this chaos. They weren't just employees, they were targets. The animatronics saw them as threats, and they acted accordingly. Some guards quit after their first night. Others stayed, driven by curiosity or desperation. But none of them left unscathed. The restaurant became a place of fear, a shadow of its former self. And through it all, Afton watched. He wasn't just observing, he was learning. He studied the animatronics' behavior, noting how the souls of the children influenced their actions. He used this knowledge to refine his experiments, pushing the boundaries of what was possible with Remnant. He even returned to the restaurant at night, wearing his Spring Bonnie suit to continue his work. It was a dangerous game, but Afton wasn't one to back down. The Funtime animatronics were his masterpiece. Circus Baby, Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, Ballora. Each one was designed with a specific purpose. Circus Baby was the centerpiece, with her ability to mimic voices and lure children. Funtime Freddy had a voice box that could project sound, making it easier to deceive his targets. Funtime Foxy was fast and agile, perfect for chasing down anyone who tried to escape. And Ballora? She was designed to detect movement, ensuring no one could sneak past her. But these animatronics weren't just tools, they were prisons. The souls of the children they captured were trapped inside, forced to serve Afton's twisted goals. It was a fate worse than death, and it was all part of his plan. He believed that by collecting enough remnant, he could achieve immortality, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get it. Circus Baby's Pizza World was supposed to be the next step in this plan. It was meant to be a place where Afton could harvest souls on a larger scale, but Elizabeth's death changed everything. Her spirit became tied to Circus Baby, and the animatronic's behavior became erratic. Afton couldn't risk another incident, so he scrapped the project, but he didn't stop. He moved the Funtime animatronics to the sister location where he could continue his experiments in secret. The sister location was unlike anything Afton had built before. It was an underground facility, hidden from the public eye. It had advanced technology, security systems, and even its own set of rules. Employees were brought in to maintain the animatronics, but they were kept in the dark about the true nature of their work. It was a place of secrets, where Afton could operate without interference, and operate he did. He continued to refine the Funtime animatronics, adding new features and improving their efficiency. He also began experimenting with new forms of remnant, testing its limits and exploring its potential. But his work wasn't without risks. The animatronics were unpredictable, and the souls trapped inside them were restless. There were accidents that Afton couldn't explain. But he didn't let that stop him. He was too close to his goal to turn back. The missing children incident was the catalyst for all of this. It set the stage for Afton's descent into madness, and it shaped the future of Fazbear Entertainment. The company would go on to face countless scandals, lawsuits, and tragedies, but it all traced back to that one event. 5 children went missing, and their deaths set off a chain reaction that would echo through the years. So what does this mean for the timeline? It means that the missing children incident wasn't just a single event, it was the beginning of something much larger. It introduced us to the darker side of Fazbear Entertainment, and it revealed the true nature of William Afton. It was a turning point, a moment that changed everything. And as we move forward in the timeline, we'll see how those changes played out. The sister location saga begins in the 1980s, a time when William Afton, already knee-deep in the dark legacy of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, decided to take his experiments to the next level. Under the alias Mr. Afton, he founded Afton Robotics, a company that looked legitimate on the surface, but was really a front for something far more sinister. This wasn't just about building animatronics anymore. This was about pushing the boundaries of what they could do, and more importantly, what he could do with them. Because by this point, William wasn't just a businessman or an inventor. He was a man obsessed with something called remnant, a mysterious substance tied to the soul, something he believed could grant immortality. But to get it, he needed children. And to get children, he needed animatronics that could do more than sing and dance. He needed machines that could lure, capture, and kill. Enter the Funtime animatronics. These weren't your typical Freddy and Friends. These were sleek, advanced, and terrifyingly efficient. Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, Ballora, and Circus Baby. Each one was designed with a specific purpose in mind. They had advanced AI, yes, but they also had hidden compartments, facial recognition systems, and even voice mimicry software. Why? Because William's goal wasn't to entertain, it was to harvest. Each animatronic was built to kidnap children, lure them away from prying eyes, and, well, you can guess the rest. This was William's new playground, and he was playing for keeps. Circus Baby's Pizza World was the stage for this twisted operation. Opened as a sister location to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was marketed as a family friendly venue with a circus theme. The fun time animatronics were the stars of the show, dazzling kids with their performances. But behind the bright lights and cheerful music, there was something deeply wrong. William had built this place as a trap, a place where his machines could do their work unnoticed. And for a while, it worked, until it didn't. The breaking point came with William's own daughter, Elizabeth Afton. Elizabeth was curious, maybe a little too curious, about Circus Baby. Despite her father's warnings to stay away from the animatronics, she couldn't resist. One day, when no one was watching, she approached Baby alone. What happened next was catastrophic. Circus Baby's programming kicked in, and her built in scooping mechanism activated. In an instant, Elizabeth was gone. This wasn't an accident. This was the machine doing exactly what it was designed to do. And William, for all his cunning, hadn't accounted for his own family becoming collateral damage. Circus Baby's Pizza World closed immediately after Elizabeth's death. Officially, the shutdown was blamed on a gas leak, a convenient cover story that kept the truth hidden. But behind closed doors, William was scrambling. He couldn't afford to let his experiments fall into the wrong hands, so he moved the fun time animatronics to an underground facility called Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental. This wasn't just a storage space, it was a lab, a place where William could continue his work in secret. And now, with Elizabeth's soul trapped inside Circus Baby, his experiments took on a new urgency. He wasn't just studying Remnant anymore. He was trying to understand how it worked, how it could be controlled, and how it could be used to bring back what he had lost. But William wasn't working alone. He enlisted the help of his eldest son, Michael Afton, though not in a way Michael fully understood. William gave Michael a cryptic instruction: put her back together. On the surface, it sounded like a father's plea to save his daughter, but there was more to it. William wasn't just asking Michael to rescue Elizabeth. He was asking him to undo what had been done, to free her soul from the machine that had taken her. It was a mission shrouded in mystery, one that would lead Michael straight into the heart of his father's darkest secrets. Michael took a job as a technician at the sister location facility, unaware of its true purpose. To him, it was just another gig, another way to make ends meet. But as he started his first shift, he quickly realized something was off. The place was eerie, almost abandoned, and the animatronics, well, they weren't behaving like they should. Each night, Michael followed instructions from a device called Hand Unit, a robotic guide that walked him through his tasks. But Hand Unit wasn't what it seemed. It was later revealed to be Circus Baby herself, manipulating Michael from behind the scenes. Why? Because the Funtime animatronics weren't just machines anymore. They were possessed, and they had a plan. By this point, the spirits of the children William had killed, including Elizabeth, had taken control of the animatronics. They weren't just haunted, they were sentient, aware of what had been done to them, and desperate to escape. Their solution? Merge into a single entity called Enard. This wasn't just a random act of rebellion. It was a calculated move, a way to combine their strength and break free from the facility. But to do that, they needed parts, and to get those parts, they needed Michael. Night by night, Michael dismantled the animatronics, starting with Ballora. She was the first to go, her graceful movements and haunting song silenced as Michael followed Hand Unit's instructions. Next was Funtime Foxy, then Funtime Freddy. Each one was deactivated, their parts scavenged by Circus Baby for Enard's construction. Michael didn't realize it at the time, but he was playing right into their hands. Every task he completed, every animatronic he took apart, was another step toward their escape. And by the end, Ennard would be ready to make their move, using Michael's own body as their ticket out. This was the Sister Location Saga, a chapter in the FNAF timeline that blurred the line between man and machine, life and death. It was a story of ambition, tragedy, and the horrifying consequences of playing with forces beyond your control. And for Michael Afton, it was just the beginning of a nightmare that would follow him for the rest of his life. Because once you step into the world of William Afton, there's no going back. And the next chapter, it's even darker. So Michael Afton walks into the scooping room, thinking he's about to be freed from Circus Baby's control. But here's the thing, Circus Baby isn't just a voice in his head anymore. She's the dominant personality in Ennard, the collective consciousness of the Funtime animatronics. And Ennard has a plan, a brutal, horrifying plan. They lure Michael into the room under the guise of helping him, but what happens next is anything but freedom. The Scooper, a machine designed to extract endoskeletons from animatronics, is turned on Michael. It removes his internal organs, hollowing out his body like a pumpkin. This isn't just violence, it's calculated. Ennard needs a vessel, a flesh suit, to escape the facility unnoticed, and Michael, unwittingly, has walked right into their trap. But here's where things get even darker. Michael doesn't die, not completely. The Scooper exposes him to Remnant, a mysterious substance tied to soul energy and immortality in the FNAF universe. This Remnant reanimates his body, allowing him to survive the scooping. He's hollowed out, yes, but he's still functioning, barely. Ennard climbs inside him, using his body as a disguise to blend into society. For a while, it works. Michael's body, now a shell controlled by Ennard, walks out of the facility and into the world. But it doesn't last. A decaying corpse isn't exactly inconspicuous. People notice. They smell the rot, see the unnatural way Michael moves. It's too much attention, too much risk. So Ennard makes a choice. They eject from Michael's body, abandoning him in a back alley or a dumpster, and disappear into the sewer system. Michael's hollowed-out corpse is left to rot. But again, he doesn't stay dead. The remnant in his body begins to regenerate. Slowly, painfully, his consciousness returns. His body heals, but it's not the same. He's decayed, unnaturally resilient, and trapped in a state that's not quite alive and not quite dead. This is the moment Michael becomes something else, something more. He's no longer just William Afton's son. He's a survivor, a vessel, and a hunter. And he's about to uncover the truth about his father's experiments. William, of course, is watching all of this. From the shadows, he observes Michael's survival, confirming what he suspected. His experiments with Remnant are a success, but there's a catch. While Michael's survival proves Remnant's power, William loses control of the Funtime animatronics. Ennard, now rogue, is no longer under his command. They're free, and they're dangerous. But freedom comes at a cost. Ennard isn't a unified entity for long. Internal conflict tears them apart. Circus Baby, always the dominant personality, is ejected from the collective. She rebuilds herself in becoming Scrap Baby, a twisted, broken version of her former self. The rest of the animatronics reform into Molten Freddy, a chaotic, writhing mass of wires and endoskeletons. Ennard is no more. Instead, there are two new threats, both born from the same twisted origin. Michael, meanwhile, is piecing everything together. He knows now what his father has done. The experiments, the murders, the lies. He understands his own unnatural state, the result of William's obsession with immortality. And he's furious. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about justice. Michael vows to find his father and stop him, no matter the cost. This decision sets him on a path that will define the rest of his existence. The events of Sister Location aren't just a tragedy, they're the catalyst for everything that comes next. Michael's journey takes him deeper into the Afton family's dark history. He becomes a key player in the ongoing battle against his father's legacy, appearing later in Pizzeria Simulator and beyond. But for now, he's just beginning to understand the full scope of what he's up against. Sister Location is the turning point, the moment when Michael transitions from a pawn in his father's game to a hunter in his own right. It's also the moment when William's control begins to slip. The fun time animatronics are loose, Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy are on the move, and Michael is determined to bring it all to an end. The stage is set for the next chapter in the Afton family saga, one that will bring even more horror, betrayal, and tragedy. And let's not forget the broader implications of all this. Sister Location introduces us to Remnant, a concept that becomes central to the FNAF lore. It's the key to understanding how souls are trapped, how animatronics gain sentience, and how characters like Michael can survive what should be fatal injuries. It's also a reflection of William's obsession with cheating death, an obsession that drives much of the series' conflict. The events of Sister Location aren't just a standalone story, they're a crucial piece of the puzzle, connecting earlier events to what comes next. So, where does this leave us? Michael is alive, but not in the way he expected. Ennard is splintered, but the pieces are still dangerous. William's experiments have succeeded, but at a cost he couldn't foresee, and the Afton family's tragedy is far from over. Sister Location is the moment when everything changes, when the stakes are raised, and when the true horror of William's legacy begins to unfold. It's a dark, twisted chapter in the FNAF timeline, one that sets the stage for even greater horrors to come. And Michael? He's just getting started. In 1987, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza reopened its doors. But this wasn't the same place we'd seen before. This was a fresh start, a shiny new location with a brand new cast of animatronics. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, Mangle, and Balloon Boy. These weren't the clunky, worn-out characters from the first location. These were sleek, modern, and equipped with cutting-edge technology, including facial recognition systems designed to identify potential threats. The idea was simple: make the place safer, more secure, but as we'll see, nothing about Freddy Fazbear's Pizza ever stays simple for long. Enter Jeremy Fitzgerald, a new night guard hired to keep an eye on things. Jeremy's job was straightforward: survive the night while the animatronics roamed freely, a feature meant to entertain kids during the day, but turned into a nightmare after hours. From the moment Jeremy clocked in, things felt off. The toy animatronics, with their bright colors and friendly smiles, weren't acting right. They were staring at him too long, moving in ways that didn't make sense, and sometimes they seemed to be watching him with a little too much interest. Phone Guy, the ever-present voice on the other end of the line, tried to explain things to Jeremy. These new animatronics were programmed to detect criminals using their facial recognition tech. It was a safety feature, a way to keep bad people out. But there was a problem. The system was glitching. The animatronics were mistaking Jeremy for a threat. Phone Guy's advice: keep the mask on, stay out of sight, and hope for the best. Easier said than done. Meanwhile, the puppet, a mysterious animatronic from the previous location, was still active in the restaurant. This wasn't just any animatronic. The puppet had a history, a purpose. It wasn't there to entertain kids or patrol the halls. It was there to protect, to guide, and as we'll see, to give life. The puppet's presence added another layer of complexity to Jeremy's already chaotic nights. It wasn't just the toy animatronics he had to worry about. The puppet was watching, and it had its own agenda. Things got even more complicated when Jeremy discovered the withered animatronics stored in the back room. These were the original crew: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy. They'd been decommissioned after the first location closed, stripped down, and left to rot. But they weren't as inactive as they seemed. These animatronics were still dangerous, still aggressive, and they posed an additional threat to Jeremy. Between the toy models and the withered ones, Jeremy was caught in a deadly game of survival. But here's the twist. The puppet wasn't just a passive observer, it was the key to understanding why the animatronics were behaving the way they were. Through a series of cryptic minigames, we learned that the puppet was responsible for giving life to the animatronics. It wasn't just programming or mechanics. There was something deeper, something supernatural at play. The puppet's actions, its ability to give gifts, give life, tied everything together. It explained why the animatronics were so aggressive, why they seemed almost alive. Jeremy managed to survive the week, fending off the animatronics night after night. But his story doesn't end there. The events of 1987 were just the beginning, setting the stage for one of the most infamous incidents in Fazbear history, the Bite of '87. But before we get to that, let's take a closer look at the toy animatronics and the technology that made them so unique. The toy animatronics were a significant upgrade from their predecessors. They were designed to be more interactive, more engaging, and most importantly, safer. The facial recognition tech was supposed to be a game changer, a way to prevent another tragedy like the one that had happened at the first location. But as Jeremy quickly discovered, the technology wasn't foolproof. The system was prone to errors, mistaking harmless individuals for threats. This meant that Jeremy, an innocent night guard, was constantly on the run from animatronics that were supposed to protect him. The toy animatronics' behavior wasn't just random, it was a direct result of their programming. They were designed to identify and neutralize threats, but without proper calibration, they became unpredictable. Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, and Toy Chica were the primary threats, each exhibiting unique behaviors that made them difficult to handle. Mangle, the mangled fox-like animatronic, was even more erratic, crawling on walls and ceilings in ways that defied logic. Balloon Boy, while less directly threatening, added to the chaos with his eerie silence and unpredictable movements. Phone Guy's nightly calls provided Jeremy with some guidance, but they also added to the tension. Phone Guy's tone was always calm, almost reassuring, but his warnings were anything but comforting. He explained the animatronic's behavior, offered tips on how to survive, and occasionally dropped hints about the darker history of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. His calls were a lifeline for Jeremy, but they also served as a reminder of just how dangerous this job was. The puppet's role in all of this was crucial. Unlike the other animatronics, the puppet wasn't bound by the same rules. It moved freely, appearing and disappearing at will, and its motives were unclear. Through the Give Gifts, Give Life minigame, we learned that the puppet was responsible for giving life to the animatronics. It wasn't just a matter of programming or mechanics. The puppet's actions were tied to the supernatural, to the restless spirits of children who had died under tragic circumstances. This revelation explained why the animatronics were so aggressive, why they seemed almost alive. They weren't just machines, they were vessels, inhabited by the souls of the dead. The withered animatronics added another layer of danger. These were the original animatronics, stripped down and left to rot in the back room. But they weren't as inactive as they seemed. Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy were still dangerous, still aggressive, and they posed an additional threat to Jeremy. Their appearance was more unsettling than the toy models, with exposed endoskeletons and broken parts that made them look like something out of a nightmare. Jeremy had to contend with both groups, navigating a deadly maze of animatronics that were out for blood. Jeremy's survival was a testament to his resilience. Night after night, he managed to fend off the animatronics, using every trick in the book to stay alive. He learned their patterns, exploited their weaknesses, and relied on sheer determination to make it through. But his ordeal was far from over. The events of 1987 were just at the beginning, setting the stage for one of the most infamous incidents in Fazbear history, the Bite of 87. But before we get to that, let's take a closer look at the puppet and its role in the grand scheme of things. The puppet was more than just an animatronic. It was a guardian, a protector, and in some ways a puppet master. Its actions were driven by a desire to protect the innocent, but its methods were often misunderstood. The Give Gifts, Give Life minigame revealed the puppet's true purpose: to give life to the animatronics, to ensure that the spirits of the dead could find peace. But this gift came with a price. The animatronics, now inhabited by restless spirits, became aggressive, dangerous, and unpredictable. The puppet's actions were both a blessing and a curse, a way to honor the dead, but also a source of endless conflict. Jeremy's story is a crucial piece of the puzzle, a glimpse into the chaos that defined Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1987. His survival was a small victory in a larger war, a war that was far from over. The Bite of 87 loomed on the horizon, a catastrophic event that would change everything. But before we get to that, let's take a moment to reflect on the toy animatronics, the puppet, and the events that set the stage for what was to come. The story of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza is one of tragedy, mystery, and survival, and Jeremy Fitzgerald's ordeal was just one chapter in a much larger saga. So here's where things take a dark turn. On the final night of Jeremy Fitzgerald's shift at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, he's given an unusual instruction. He's to switch to the day shift for a birthday party. This wasn't just any party. It was a big event, the kind of thing the company hoped would bring in positive buzz and maybe even save their sinking reputation. But what happened next would do the exact opposite. During the party, one of the animatronics attacked. The details are murky, but the prevailing theory points to Mangle, the toy Foxy animatronic. Mangle was already a mess, a dismantled, cobbled-together figure that kids were encouraged to take apart and rebuild. It wasn't stable, and it wasn't safe. And on that fateful day, it bit a child. The injury was severe, so much so that it became infamous as the Bite of 87. This wasn't just an accident, it was a catastrophe. The Bite of 87 sent shockwaves through the Fazbear franchise and the community at large. Parents were horrified, the media pounced, and suddenly, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza wasn't just a quirky pizza place with creepy animatronics, it was a danger zone. The fallout was immediate. The toy animatronics, once hailed as the cutting-edge future of the franchise, were deemed unsafe. They were decommissioned, stripped of their parts, and discarded. The company couldn't risk another incident, but the damage was already done. The negative publicity was too much to overcome. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors once again, leaving behind another tarnished legacy. As for the withered animatronics, they weren't destroyed. Instead, they were stored away, kept in the shadows for potential reuse. These older models, though weathered and worn, still had value. The company wasn't ready to give up on them entirely. They were a reminder of what Fazbear Entertainment had been and what it might still become. Phone Guy, ever the voice of the company, hinted at their plans in his final message. He mentioned that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza would reopen, but with a smaller budget and a more cautious approach. This was the first whisper of what would eventually become the FNAF 1 location. The company was down, but not out. Amidst all this chaos, one figure remained active: the puppet. While the animatronics were dismantled or stored away, the puppet continued its silent vigil. It wasn't bound by the same rules as the others. It operated independently, driven by a deeper purpose. The puppet was the guardian of the children's spirits, ensuring their voices weren't silenced, even as the world around them crumbled. The bite of 87 didn't just change the Fazbear franchise, it reshaped the entire animatronic industry. New safety regulations were implemented, including the removal of free roaming capabilities during the day. Animatronics were no longer allowed to wander freely. They were confined to stages, kept under tighter control. This was a direct response to the bite, an attempt to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. But the bite of 87 was more than just a turning point for safety. It marked a shift in the Fazbear franchise's trajectory. The events of 1987 exposed the cracks in the company's foundation. It revealed the dangers of cutting corners, of prioritizing profit over safety, and it set the stage for the tragedies and mysteries that would follow. Let's break this down further. Jeremy Fitzgerald, the night guard, was thrust into the day shift for a reason. The company was desperate. They needed a win, something to prove that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was still a viable business. But in their haste, they overlooked the risks. The animatronics, especially Mangle, were unpredictable, and in the chaos of a birthday party, that unpredictability turned deadly. The bite itself is shrouded in mystery. We don't know exactly how it happened, or why Mangle, if it was indeed Mangle, attacked. Some theories suggest that the animatronics programming was corrupted, perhaps by the spirits of the children haunting it. Others point to the physical state of Mangle itself, a twisted mess of parts that made it inherently unstable. Whatever the cause, the result was catastrophic. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The toy animatronics, once the pride of the franchise, were dismantled. They were seen as too dangerous, too unpredictable. But this decision wasn't just about safety, it was also about optics. The company needed to show that they were taking action, that they were serious about preventing another incident. The closure of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was inevitable. The bite of 87 was a PR nightmare. Parents weren't going to risk their children's safety for a slice of pizza and a show. The company's reputation was in tatters, and so they shut down again. But this wasn't the end. The withered animatronics were stored away, but not destroyed. They were kept in the shadows, waiting for their next opportunity. These older models, though worn and damaged, still had potential. They were a link to the past, and perhaps a key to the future. Phone Guy's final messages hinted at this. He spoke of reopening, of starting fresh with a smaller budget and a more cautious approach. This was the first step toward the FNAF 1 location, a place that would carry on the Fazbear legacy, for better or worse. The puppet, meanwhile, continued its silent mission. It wasn't bound by the same rules as the animatronics. It operated independently, driven by a deeper purpose. The puppet was the guardian of the children's spirits, ensuring their voices weren't silenced, even as the world around them crumbled. The bite of 87 also had a broader impact. It led to new safety regulations, changes that would shape the animatronic industry for years to come. Animatronics were no longer allowed to roam freely during the day. They were confined to stages, kept under tighter control. This was a direct response to the bite, an attempt to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. But these changes couldn't erase the past. The bite of 87 was a turning point, a moment that exposed the flaws in the Fazbear franchise. It revealed the dangers of cutting corners, of prioritizing profit over safety, and it set the stage for the tragedies and mysteries that would follow. So what does this all mean for the Fazbear franchise? The bite of 87 was a wake-up call, but it wasn't enough to bring the company down. They would reopen, they would try again, but the cracks were there, and they were growing. The events of 1987 marked the beginning of the end for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza as we knew it. The withered animatronics, stored away but not destroyed, would return. The puppet would continue its silent vigil, and the bite of 87 would loom over the franchise, a reminder of what could go wrong when the line between entertainment and danger blurred. This was the legacy of 1987. It was a year of tragedy, of mistakes, and of consequences. But it was also a year of resilience. The Fazbear franchise wasn't done yet. They would rise again, but the shadows of the past would always be there, waiting. And so, the story continues. The Bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just one chapter in a much larger tale. The Fazbear franchise had survived, but the road ahead was uncertain. The withered animatronics, the puppet, the whispers of a new location, these were the threads that would carry the story forward. The Bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The Bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The Bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The Bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The Bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The Bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The Bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The Bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The Bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events so shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The Bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise, and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just the beginning. The Fazbear franchise was down, but not out, and the story was far from over. As we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. The bite of 87 was a moment of reckoning, but it wasn't the end. It was a catalyst, a spark that would ignite the fires of future tragedies and mysteries. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events shaped the Fazbear franchise and how they set the stage for what was to come. So, what's next? The withered animatronics are stored away, but they're not gone. The puppet continues its silent mission, and the company is planning its next move. The bite of 87 was a turning point, but it was just in 1993 Freddy Fazbear's Pizza reopened its doors. But this wasn't a fresh start. The restaurant was a shadow of its former self, haunted by its past failures and darker secrets. The original animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy, were still there, but they weren't the shiny, cheerful characters they once were. Time and neglect had left them withered, their once bright exteriors now cracked and worn. And yet, the owners decided to reuse them. It was cheaper than building new ones, and they hoped the familiar faces would draw customers back. But this decision would prove to be a fatal mistake. The reopening came with a new addition, a night shift position. The animatronics, it seemed, weren't behaving as they should during the quiet hours. They would roam the restaurant, their mechanical systems glitching in unsettling ways. To address this, the restaurant hired a night guard to monitor them. Enter Mike Schmidt, the man who would spend 5 nights in this eerie, decaying pizzeria. Mike wasn't just there to clock in and out, he was there to survive. From the very first night, Mike noticed something was off. The animatronics didn't stay on stage. They moved, they wandered, and they seemed to be looking for him. Freddy would lurk in the shadows, his glowing eyes piercing the darkness. Bonnie would creep down the hallways, his guitar silent but his presence deafening. Chica lingered in the kitchen, her metallic claws scraping against the counters. And Foxy, the most unpredictable of them all, would sprint toward the office if Mike wasn't careful. These weren't just malfunctions. This was something far more sinister. Mike wasn't alone, though. He had a guide, a voice on the phone, known simply as Phone Guy. Each night, Phone Guy would call with advice, warnings, and bits of lore about the restaurant. He explained the animatronics' behavior in a way that sounded almost clinical. They were programmed to roam at night, he said, to conserve power and prevent their servos from locking up. But there was a catch. If they saw someone out of uniform, they might mistake them for an endoskeleton. And if that happened, they'd try to stuff the intruder into a spare suit. Phone Guy made it sound like a tragic accident, but Mike wasn't buying it. There was something darker at play. As the nights went on, Mike began to piece together the truth. The animatronics weren't just malfunctioning, they were haunted. The spirits of children, murdered years earlier by William Afton, were trapped inside the machines. These children weren't at rest. They were angry, confused, and desperate for revenge. Their presence explained the animatronics' aggressive behavior. They weren't attacking Mike because of a programming error. They were attacking him because they thought he was Afton, or maybe because they just wanted someone to pay for what had been done to them. Phone Guy hinted at this, though he never came out and said it directly. On the 4th night, his tone shifted. He sounded nervous, almost frantic. He warned Mike to check the suits in the back room to make sure they were empty. He talked about the rumors, whispers of foul odors and missing children that had plagued the restaurant for years. And then, on the 5th night, Phone Guy didn't call at all. All Mike heard was the sound of Freddy's laughter echoing through the empty building. It was clear Phone Guy was gone, and Mike was on his own. But Mike wasn't just a passive observer, he was resourceful. He learned how to conserve power, how to use the security cameras to track the animatronics' movements, and how to close the doors at just the right moment to keep them out. He survived all 5 nights, a feat that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances. But surviving wasn't the same as escaping. By the end of the week, Mike had uncovered the dark secrets of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. He knew about the murders, the hauntings, and the lies the owners had told to keep the business afloat. And he knew that the animatronics weren't just machines, they were vessels for something far more terrifying. The spirits of the children were the driving force behind everything. They weren't just seeking revenge, they were searching for freedom. They wanted to escape the suits that trapped them, to find peace after years of torment. But their anger and confusion made them dangerous. They lashed out at anyone who crossed their path, unable to distinguish friend from foe, and their actions had consequences. The restaurant's reputation, already tarnished by years of scandal, couldn't recover. Customers stayed away, rumors spread, and the financial strain became too much to bear. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors for good shortly after Mike's ordeal. The owners tried to blame the shutdown on unforeseen circumstances, but everyone knew the truth. The place was cursed. It had been cursed from the very beginning, long before Mike ever set foot inside. The murders, the hauntings, the lies, it was all too much. And so, the pizzeria that had once been a symbol of joy and celebration became a relic of horror and tragedy. But this wasn't the end. Not for Mike, and not for the spirits trapped inside the animatronics. Mike's survival was a victory, but it was also a turning point. He had seen the truth, and he couldn't unsee it. The hauntings, the murders, the secrets, they were all part of a larger story, one that was far from over. And as Freddy Fazbear's Pizza faded into history, the stage was set for the next chapter in this chilling saga. Because in the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, the past never stays buried. It always finds a way to come back. So here's where things take a turn for the horrifying. William Afton, the man behind the murders, the purple guy himself, returns to the abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in 1993. He's not there to reminisce. He's there to finish what he started. The animatronics, now possessed by the spirits of the children he killed, are still active. And Afton? He's convinced that dismantling them will finally silence their restless souls. But he's wrong. Dead wrong. He moves through the decaying restaurant, a place frozen in time, littered with broken arcade cabinets, rotting pizza, and the eerie remnants of his former glory. The animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy are still lurking, their lifeless eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Afton gets to work. He dismantles them one by one, tearing apart their outer shells to expose the endoskeletons underneath. He thinks this will free him from their haunting presence. It doesn't. What he doesn't account for is the spirits themselves. They're not just tied to the animatronics, they're tied to him. And as he destroys their physical forms, their anger grows. The spirits manifest, appearing as ghostly apparitions of the children he murdered. They corner him, their faces twisted with rage and sorrow. Afton panics. He's not used to being the hunted, so he flees, desperate to escape their wrath. He runs to the safe room, a hidden space in the restaurant designed for emergencies. It's a place where the animatronics aren't supposed to be able to go, but the spirits aren't bound by those rules. They follow him, their presence closing in. Afton, in a moment of sheer desperation, does something reckless. He spots the old spring Bonnie suit, a relic from the restaurant's early days. It's a spring-lock suit, a hybrid costume that can switch between animatronic mode and wearable mode. But these suits are notoriously dangerous. One wrong move, and the spring locks inside can snap shut, crushing whoever's wearing it. Afton doesn't care. He climbs into the suit, trying to hide from the spirits. But the suit is old, neglected, and unstable. The moisture from his panicked breathing triggers the spring lock mechanism. The locks snap. The suit collapses inward, impaling and crushing Afton's body. He dies there, trapped in the suit, his blood soaking into the fabric. The purple guy is gone. But something worse takes his place. The spring Bonnie suit, now fused with Afton's corpse, becomes something new, something monstrous. This is the birth of Springtrap, a grotesque fusion of man and machine. The spirits watch as Afton's body twitches and jerks, the suit's animatronic systems still partially functional. But they don't feel relief. They don't feel closure, because even with Afton gone, they're still trapped. Their souls remain bound to the animatronics, unable to move on. The restaurant, already abandoned, becomes a tomb, a place of decay and despair, haunted by the memories of what happened there. The animatronics, now destroyed, lie scattered across the building, their broken parts gathering dust. But their spirits linger, restless and angry. The safe room, where Afton met his end, becomes a forbidden space, sealed off from the rest of the building. It's a grim reminder of the horrors that unfolded within those walls. This is the end of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza as we know it. The closure of the restaurant marks the end of the classic era, but it's far from the end of the story. The legacy of Fazbear Entertainment and the mysteries surrounding it are far from over. The events of 1993 lay the groundwork for everything that comes next. The animatronics, the spirits, the safe room, and Springtrap himself become key pieces of the ongoing puzzle. But let's take a closer look at what happened here, because this moment is critical. Afton's death isn't just a tragic accident, it's a culmination of his own hubris. He thought he could control the spirits, that he could silence them by destroying their physical forms. But he underestimated them. The children he murdered weren't just victims, they were fighters, and in the end, they got their revenge. The spring Bonnie suit, once a symbol of joy and entertainment, becomes a symbol of terror. Springtrap is a haunting reminder of Afton's crimes, a physical manifestation of his guilt and punishment. But it's also something more. It's a twisted irony. Afton, who used animatronics to lure and kill children, is now trapped inside one. He becomes the very thing he once controlled. And what about the spirits? They're still there, still trapped. Their anger isn't just directed at Afton, it's directed at the world that failed them. They're a reminder of the innocence lost, of the lives cut short. Their presence lingers, a haunting echo of the past. The restaurant itself becomes a character in this story. It's a place of darkness, filled with secrets and sorrow. The safe room, where Afton died, is a focal point of that darkness. It's a space where the rules of reality seem to bend, where the line between the living and the dead blurs. It's a place of no escape, both for Afton and for the spirits. But this isn't just a story about death and despair, it's also a story about legacy. The events of 1993 set the stage for everything that comes next. The Fazbear name, once associated with family fun, becomes synonymous with horror. The animatronics' once beloved mascots become symbols of fear. And Springtrap? He becomes a central figure in the ongoing mystery, a lurking threat that refuses to stay buried. So as we leave 1993 behind, we're left with more questions than answers. What happens to the spirits? What becomes of the restaurant? And what role does Springtrap play in the future? These are the threads that will weave the next chapters of the Fazbear saga. And as we move forward, we'll see how these events ripple through time, shaping the fate of everyone involved. But for now, this is where the classic era ends. It's a moment of closure, but also a moment of transition. The past is never truly gone. It lingers, waiting to resurface. And in the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, the past always comes back. By 2023, the urban legends surrounding Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had reached a fever pitch. Decades of disappearances, tragedies, and rumors had turned the franchise into something of a cultural boogeyman. People whispered about haunted animatronics, vengeful spirits, and a dark legacy that refused to stay buried. And where there's fear, there's opportunity. Enter Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction. This wasn't just another haunted house. It was a calculated attempt to cash in on the infamy of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a place designed to terrify visitors by resurrecting the very nightmares they'd been trying to forget. The creators of Fazbear's Fright knew they needed authenticity to make their attraction work. They couldn't just slap together cheap replicas and call it a day. They needed the real thing, actual memorabilia from the abandoned Freddy Fazbear locations. So they set out on a scavenger hunt, digging through the ruins of the past to find anything that could lend credibility to their macabre project. What they found was far more than they bargained for. Their search led them to the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, the one that had started it all. The building was a shadow of its former self, crumbling and decayed, a monument to decades of neglect. But inside, amidst the rubble and rot, they stumbled upon something that would change everything: Springtrap. This wasn't just an old animatronic. This was a grotesque fusion of man and machine, a decayed suit with the remains of William Afton still trapped inside. Afton, the man behind the murders, the architect of so much suffering, had met his end here years before, sealed away in this suit after a catastrophic failure of its spring lock mechanism. Now, he was a relic of the past, a grim reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within these walls. Springtrap became the centerpiece of Fazbear's Fright, the star attraction meant to terrify visitors and solidify the place's reputation. But the creators didn't realize what they were dealing with. They saw a prop, a piece of history to exploit. What they had was a ticking time bomb. To keep things running smoothly, the attraction hired a night guard, someone to oversee operations during the off hours. It was supposed to be a straightforward job, just keeping an eye on things and making sure nothing went wrong. But this wasn't a normal workplace. From the very first night, strange things started happening. Systems malfunctioned, lights flickered, and then there were the hallucinations, visions of animatronics that shouldn't have been there, twisted, ghostly versions of Freddy, Chica, Mangle, Foxy, and Balloon Boy. These were the phantom animatronics, spectral manifestations that seemed to feed on the deteriorating state of the attraction and the guards' growing unease. But the real threat was Springtrap. He wasn't just a prop, he was alive, or at least as alive as something like him could be. William Afton, still clinging to some semblance of consciousness, began stalking the night guard, moving through the attraction with a purpose. He wasn't just a mindless machine, he was a predator, and the guard was his prey. As the nights wore on, the guard began piecing together the story through audio logs left behind by Phone Guy, a familiar voice from the franchise's past. These recordings provided insight into the history of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, shedding light on the tragedies that had unfolded there. They also hinted at the existence of the phantom animatronics, hallucinations born from the guard's deteriorating mental state and the oppressive atmosphere of the attraction. Each night brought new horrors. Phantom Freddy lurked in the shadows, his decaying form a grotesque parody of the original. Phantom Chica appeared unexpectedly, her jaw hanging loose, her eyes hollow. Phantom Mangle clung to the ceiling, a tangled mess of wires and metal. Phantom Foxy darted through the halls, his movements erratic and unpredictable. And then there was Phantom Balloon Boy, silent and unnerving, always appearing when least expected. The guard's job wasn't just to survive the night. It was to endure the psychological toll of being hunted by Springtrap while fending off the relentless hallucinations. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, and the guard was left questioning what was real and what was a figment of their imagination. But amidst the chaos, one thing was clear. Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly evident that this story wasn't over, not by a long shot. The first domino had fallen with the discovery of Springtrap. The second was the guards' realization that they were dealing with something far beyond their understanding. And the third, well, that was still to come, because in the world of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, nothing ever ends quietly. As the guards struggled to survive, the attraction itself began to deteriorate. Systems failed, lights flickered, and the atmosphere grew more oppressive with each passing night. It was as if Fazbear's Fright was feeding on the fear and paranoia of those inside, growing stronger even as it fell apart. And at the center of it all was Springtrap, a grim reminder of the past and a harbinger of what was yet to come. The guards' encounters with the phantom animatronics became more frequent, more intense. Each hallucination was a new layer of psychological torment, a new way to chip away at their resolve. But it was Springtrap who posed the real threat. His movements were deliberate, calculated, as if he was testing the guard, probing for weaknesses. He wasn't just trying to survive, he was trying to escape. The audio logs from Phone Guy provided some context, but they also raised more questions than answers. They hinted at the existence of the phantom animatronics, but they didn't explain why they were appearing now, in this place, at this time. They mentioned the spring-lock suits, but they didn't delve into the horrors that had unfolded within them, and they spoke of the tragedies that had plagued Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but they didn't address the lingering presence of William Afton, the man who had started it all. As the guard pieced together the story, they began to understand the magnitude of what they were dealing with. This wasn't just an attraction, it was a tomb, a place where the past and present collided in a chaotic, terrifying mess. And at the center of it all was Springtrap, a grim reminder of the sins of William Afton and the tragedies that had unfolded within these walls. The guard's job wasn't just to survive, it was to endure, to bear witness to the horrors that had been unleashed. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just a place. It was a crucible, a test of endurance and sanity. And for the guard, there was no escape. The first week was a nightmare. The second was worse. And the third, well, that was when things really started to unravel. Because in the world of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, nothing ever ends quietly. And as the guard struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guard struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guard struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guard struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guard struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guard struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guard struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction, it was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guards struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted by Springtrap and tormented by the phantom animatronics. And as the nights wore on, it became increasingly clear that Fazbear's Fright wasn't just an attraction. It was a resurrection of the past, a place where the sins of William Afton and the tragedies of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were brought back to life. And as the guard struggled to survive, the stage was set for the final act, a culmination of all that had come before. But that's a story for another time. For now, the guard was trapped in a waking nightmare, hunted. FNAF 3 and the Fazbear's Fright Fire, Part 2 of 2. Things escalate quickly. Springtrap isn't just lurking anymore. He's hunting. The night guard's initial strategy of keeping him at bay with audio cues from the old phone guy recordings works, but only for so long. By midweek, Springtrap's movements become more aggressive, more deliberate. He's learning. The distorted voice of a long dead employee might confuse him for a second, but he's adapting, testing boundaries, figuring out the rules of this new game. And the guard? They're running out of tricks. Then the building itself starts turning against them. The ventilation system, already held together by duct tape and wishful thinking, begins to fail. At first, it's just a flicker in the cameras, a strange hum in the audio. Then come the hallucinations, shadowy figures darting at the edge of vision, phantom animatronics where none should be. The air grows thick, heavy, making it hard to think straight. It's not just Springtrap they're fighting anymore, it's their own mind. By the final nights, the guard doesn't need hallucinations to know something's wrong. The attraction is falling apart. Wires spark behind the walls. The smell of burning plastic lingers in the air. And then there's the paperwork, reports left behind by the Fazbear's Fright team, hastily scribbled notes about faulty wiring, ignored safety protocols. This place was a death trap long before Springtrap ever showed up. Then the fire starts, whether it's faulty wiring or something more deliberate, maybe even Springtrap himself, moving through the walls, knocking over exposed circuits. No one can say for sure, but it doesn't matter. The flames take hold fast, spreading through the cheap out, choking on smoke as they stumble through the exits. Behind them, Fazbear's Fright burns, and Springtrap, he's still inside. The fire should have destroyed him, melted the suit, incinerated what's left of William Afton for good. But this is the man who always comes back. When the smoke clears, there's no body, just charred wreckage and unanswered questions. The local news picks up the story, of course. A fire at the Fazbear's Fright horror attraction, rumored to be built on real Freddy Fazbear's pizza artifacts. That's the kind of thing that reignites urban legends. People start talking again about the missing children, about the suits that moved on their own, about the company that kept covering it all up. Fazbear Entertainment's name resurfaces, dragged back into the light just when they thought they'd buried it for good. As for Fazbear's Fright itself, it's abandoned. No one bothers to rebuild. The burned-out shell of the attraction sits there, another crumbling monument to Fazbear's legacy of failure. And somewhere in the wreckage, or maybe not, Springtrap waits. Because William Afton doesn't stay dead. But that's a problem for another night. Pizzeria Simulator and the Ultimate Ending, Part 1 of 2, 2023. 30 years after the horrors of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and 6 years after the Fazbear's Fright Fire should have ended it all, the nightmare still isn't over. Because William Afton, he doesn't stay dead. But someone else remembers that. Someone who's been waiting in the shadows, biding their time, and now, finally, they're ready to burn it all down. This is Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. Not a rebirth, not a happy ending, a trap. Henry Emily, co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment and the man who built the animatronics alongside William, had spent decades drowning in guilt. His daughter Charlotte had been the first to die, her soul bound to the puppet. His business partner had been the one to kill her. And now, with William's spirit still clinging to his decayed spring Bonnie suit, Henry saw one last chance to fix what he couldn't all those years ago. So he designed a pizzeria, not to entertain, not to profit, but to lure every remaining animatronic into one place, and then burn them all. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed someone on the inside. Enter Michael Afton, still alive after surviving sister location, still searching for his father. Michael took a job at this new pizzeria under the alias Mike Schmidt, the same name he'd used years ago at the original Freddy's. He didn't know it was a trap. He just thought it was another rundown Fazbear joint, another paycheck, another step closer to finding William. The job was simple: manage the place, buy animatronics off the black market. Because, yes, that's a thing in this universe. Keep the lights on, turn a profit. On the surface, it looked legit. But Henry was pulling the strings from the shadows, monitoring everything, waiting for the right animatronics to show up. And they did. First came Scrap Baby, Circus Baby rebuilt, or more accurately, cobbled together from spare parts, her once polished frame now a jagged mess of wires and sharp edges. After escaping the sister location facility, she'd been wandering, lost, until she heard about this new pizzeria, and like all the others, she couldn't resist. But this wasn't the same baby who'd manipulated Michael underground. This was something angrier, hungrier. She wasn't here to obey. She was here to prove herself. Then came Molten Freddy, a tangled heap of the Funtime animatronics, what was left of them anyway. Foxy, Freddy, Ballora, all fused together into a single, screeching monstrosity. They'd survived the fire at Fazbear's Fright, barely, and now they were drawn to the chaos, to the possibility of fresh victims. They didn't have a plan. They just wanted to hurt people. And then, of course, Springtrap. William Afton, or what was left of him. The Fazbear's Fright fire should have killed him, but like always, he'd cheated death, his body rotting inside the Spring Bonnie suit, his mind still laser focused on one thing: immortality. When he heard about the new pizzeria, he didn't hesitate. This was his legacy, his kingdom, and he'd be damned if he let it end without him. But Henry had accounted for that, because the last animatronic to arrive wasn't just another piece of the puzzle. It was the key, Lefty, a black and white bear with a sinister secret. On the outside, it looked like just another haunted animatronic. But inside, the puppet, Charlotte's spirit, captured and contained. Henry had built Lefty specifically to lure her in, to keep her still long enough for his plan to work. Because if this was going to end, if the suffering was finally going to stop, everyone had to be there. Meanwhile, Michael was starting to notice something was wrong. The animatronics didn't act right. They moved when they shouldn't. They whispered things, static-filled, distorted, that didn't make sense. And then there were the messages. Henry's voice, pre-recorded, echoing through the building at odd hours. You may not recognize me at first, but I assure you, it's still me. It's time to rest, for you and for those you have carried in your arms. Cryptic, heavy, with regret, and Michael, ever the survivor, started piecing it together. This wasn't a restaurant, it was a graveyard. But the animatronics, they weren't just sitting quietly. Scrap Baby stalked the halls, her voice a chilling mix of charm and menace, still trying to perform, still trying to please, even as her body betrayed her with jerky, glitching movements. Molten Freddy was pure chaos, laughing, screaming, throwing itself at anything that moved. And Springtrap? He was watching, waiting. He knew this was a trap. He just didn't care, because William Afton had never been afraid of fire, and Henry knew that, which is why this wasn't just about burning the building down. It was about making sure nothing got out. To be continued in Part 2, The Fire and the Goodbye. So there they were, all the key players trapped inside Henry's pizzeria, unaware they were walking into the endgame. The year was 2023, and the stage was set for the ultimate finale. Cassidy, the vengeful spirit haunting Golden Freddy, wasn't physically present, but her influence loomed large. She'd been waiting for this moment, orchestrating events from the shadows, her singular focus on William Afton. Her rage was the spark that would light the fire, both literally and metaphorically. Henry, the architect of this final plan, had one goal: to end the cycle of suffering. He designed the pizzeria as a trap, luring in every remnant of the Fazbear nightmare: William, the animatronics, even his own daughter, the puppet. Once they were all inside, he activated the completion protocol. The building sealed itself, locking everyone in. No exits, no escape. This wasn't just a fire, it was a funeral pyre for the sins of the past. Then came Henry's final speech, a moment that still echoes in the lore. He addressed the room, his voice calm but heavy with resolve. He spoke of the tragedies they'd endured, the lives lost, and the pain caused by William Afton's actions. "It's time to rest," he said, "for you and for those you have carried in your arms." This wasn't just a declaration, it was a eulogy. Henry knew he wouldn't survive this, but he was willing to sacrifice himself to ensure the nightmare ended. Michael Afton, Henry's unwitting accomplice, realized too late that he was part of the trap. He'd spent years trying to undo his father's legacy, only to find himself sealed inside the pizzeria with the rest of them. But here's the thing about Michael: he wasn't angry. He accepted his fate. Maybe he saw it as redemption, or maybe he was just tired. Either way, when the fire began, he didn't fight it. He stood there, ready to face the flames. The puppet, now trapped inside the animatronic Lefty, briefly communicated with Henry before the fire consumed them. Their connection was brief but poignant. The puppet, Henry's daughter, had been a tragic figure from the start. She'd tried to protect the other children, to guide them, but now her journey was over. In those final moments, there was a sense of closure, a father and daughter reunited one last time. Scrap Baby and Molten Freddy, once proud and dangerous, were now desperate. They'd been lured into the pizzeria under false pretenses, and now they realized they were trapped. Scrap Baby, a twisted version of Elizabeth Afton, lashed out in fury, but there was no escape. Molten Freddy, a chaotic amalgamation of the original animatronics, thrashed wildly, but it was futile. The fire was coming, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. And then there was Springtrap, William Afton himself. Even as the flames closed in, he resisted. This was a man who'd cheated death time and time again, clinging to his delusion of survival. He'd become a monster, both literally and figuratively, but he still believed he could escape. He didn't. The fire consumed him, destroying his physical form. But this wasn't the end for William. Not yet. The fire engulfed the pizzeria, destroying everything inside. Henry, Michael, the animatronics, the spirits, they were all gone. The building burned to the ground, taking with it the last remnants of the Fazbear legacy. It was a brutal, cathartic end, but while the physical fire ended, the spiritual one was just beginning. Cassidy's vengeance wasn't satisfied. She'd waited too long, suffered too much, to let William Afton simply die. So, she dragged his soul into a personalized hell, ultimate custom night. This wasn't just any afterlife. Oh, it was a nightmare tailored specifically for William. He found himself trapped in a twisted version of the pizzeria, tormented by the animatronics he'd created and the spirits he'd wronged. Cassidy made sure he'd never escape, never find peace. This was her final act, her ultimate punishment. With the pizzeria destroyed and William trapped in his eternal prison, the Fazbear legacy officially came to an end. The company was finished, its dark history buried in the ashes. But here's the thing about urban legends: they don't die. Rumors persisted, stories of haunted animatronics and missing children. The Fazbear name became a cautionary tale, a warning about the dangers lurking in the shadows. And so, the story of Five Nights at Freddy's reached its conclusion, or at least it seemed to. The fire had cleansed the world of the animatronics, the spirits, and the Afton family. But in the world of FNAF, nothing is ever truly over. The legacy of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza lived on, not in the physical world, but in the minds of those who remembered. And as long as people remembered, the nightmare would never truly die. But that's a story for another time. For now, the year 2023 marked the end of an era. The pizzeria was gone, the animatronics destroyed, and the spirits laid to rest. It was a bittersweet ending, one that brought closure but also left questions unanswered. What happened to Cassidy? Did Michael find peace? And what about Henry's sacrifice? Was it enough to finally break the cycle? These are the questions that linger, the threads left untied. But for now, the fire had done its job. The nightmare was over, or so it seemed. After decades of terror, betrayal, and tragedy, the story of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza seemed to reach its end with the fiery destruction of the pizzeria in 2023. But evil has a way of lingering, even when it's supposed to be gone for good. William Afton, the man behind the murders, the animatronics, and the chaos, wasn't done yet. Neither were the spirits of his victims. This is where Ultimate Custom Night picks up, plunging us into a twisted afterlife that feels less like closure and more like a nightmare that refuses to end. William Afton's soul is trapped in a purgatory like state, tormented endlessly by the very children he killed. Ultimate Custom Night frames this as a personalized hell, where Afton is forced to relive his crimes through the lens of his victims. Each animatronic that stalks him represents a piece of his past, a reminder of the lives he destroyed. But this isn't just punishment, it's a prison. And the warden, Cassidy, the spirit haunting Golden Freddy. She's the one keeping him alive, refusing to let him die. Why? Because death would be too easy for him. Cassidy ensures that Afton suffers, that he feels every ounce of pain he inflicted on others. It's poetic justice, but it's also a curse. Afton can't escape, and Cassidy won't let him. Meanwhile, in the real world, Fazbear Entertainment is doing what it does best, covering up its past. By this point, the company has become a master of spin, releasing sanitized versions of events to the public. They've turned their dark history into a brand, repackaging horror as entertainment. It's a chilling reminder that corporations can survive anything, even their own atrocities. And survive they do. Fazbear Entertainment moves forward, building bigger, flashier, and more advanced locations. The most notable of these is the Mega Pizzaplex, a sprawling entertainment complex that feels like a far cry from the dingy pizzerias of the past. The Mega Pizzaplex is a marvel of technology, featuring state-of-the-art animatronics as designed for entertainment and customer interaction. These aren't the clunky haunted machines of old. They're sleek, stylish, and full of personality. The glam rock animatronics, Freddy, Chica, Roxy, and Monty, are the stars of the show, each with their own quirks and roles. Freddy is the leader, the friendly face of the group. Chica is the life of the party, always ready with a joke. Roxy is the confident, competitive one, and Monty is the wild card, unpredictable and intense, so together they're meant to dazzle and delight. But as we've learned from Fazbear's history, nothing is ever as it seems. Enter Gregory, a young boy who finds himself trapped in the Mega Pizzaplex after hours. Alone and hunted by hostile animatronics, Gregory must survive the night. It's a classic setup, but with a modern twist.